So you may recall that the Australian government launched a $30 million advertising campaign back in April 2016 aimed at stopping violence against women and their children, presumably to match the funding given to advertising campaigns to stop violence against men and their children. You know, for the purposes of gender equality. And yes, that was sarcasm. Of course, there are no such campaigns to stop violence against men. But out of the total $100 million of funding announced in 2016, $2 million was aimed at men. That is, to stop male perpetrators from reoffending. Because in Australia, violence is perpetrated by men towards women, which is kind of odd when you consider that the Australian Bureau of Statistics shows that men are more likely to be victims of violent crime and always have been and constitute 1/3 of domestic violence victims. But that's not convenient to the narrative. We must stop violence against that part of the population that is least likely to experience it, because gender equality or something. And now in the current year, the second phase of the advertising campaign to stop violence against the people least likely to experience it is underway with a new set of ads. And again, it's aimed at changing attitudes of men and boys by highlighting excuses made by parents when boys show disrespectful behaviour towards girls. Now, I'm not going to play those ads. I'll leave the links below. They are, as usual, convoluted and unrealistic. And of course, they have the like-dislike feature muted and comments disabled. What I want to focus on here is the idea of respect, starting with the former Prime Minister, and gee, isn't it nice to preface that phrase with former? You see, Malcolm Turnbull was the chief purveyor of this idea that we need to teach men and boys to respect women more, with this ridiculous cliche.
Disrespecting women does not always lead to violence against women, but that is where all violence against women begins.
And now the Minister for Women, a redundant position, is repeating this nonsense. While not all disrespect ends with violence, the cycle of violence certainly starts with disrespect. Well, at least she took the gender out of it. But she went on to say that throwaway comments like, "it's just boys being boys," or "he did it because he likes you," can make young people think disrespect is a normal part of growing up. We need to ask ourselves, is that what we meant? Actually, what we really need to ask is, do people actually say that, or are you just straw-manning for the sake of your narrative? But it's clear that respect is a one-way street. Males must respect females, but females respecting males, well, not so much. And what is the evidence for this besides cliches like boys will be boys? Well, how could you have missed it? Campaign to tackle attitudes to domestic violence in young people. Shocking statistics that a quarter of young people believe it's acceptable for a man to hit his girlfriend if he's drunk. The Daily Mail. More than a quarter of young people believe it's okay for a usually gentle man to slap his girlfriend, as long as he's drunk. Now, it took me some time to track down the source for this data, but I found it on this website called The Line, which tells us some facts about violence. One of them being, not only do boys hit their girlfriends, but they feel compelled to ride it on their own backs. Surprisingly neatly as well. Don't try that at home. Independent research commissioned by Our Watch found, amongst other problematic attitudes, 1 in 4 don't think it's serious if a guy who's normally gentle sometimes slaps his girlfriend when he's drunk and they're arguing. Now, if you go over to Our Watch, you can't actually find the original document, and it doesn't show up in any report on their page. You see, they outsourced that survey, as they often do, to a market research company called Hall & Partners Open Mind. As you can see, it was completed in 2015 and generated this headline: "Too many young men with negative attitudes to sex and violence survey finds." So this is just a recycled talking point. But here it is in all its glory on page 12. But notice it's not quite the same as it has been represented by the media, who I'm sure never actually bothered to look at the original document. The question reads, "A guy is as gentle as a lamb. It is just every now and again when he gets drunk, he and his girlfriend fight, and sometimes he slaps her lightly." Now, I submit to you that's not quite the same as a quarter of young people believe it's acceptable for a man to hit his girlfriend if he's drunk. And note the question asks whether you believe this is a serious issue. So 24% don't think it's serious, but that doesn't mean they think it's acceptable. And why such a convoluted question? Well, that's easy. Researchers know that if they simply asked, "Is it okay to hit your girlfriend when you're drunk?" you won't get a high amount of agreement. But put in all the modifiers and you can get a higher percentage. Now, if you're even slightly inquisitive and haven't been captured by the all men are violent and all women are innocent victims narrative, you might be inclined to ask, what are the survey results when the questions are reversed? That is, what percentage of 14 to 24-year-olds think it's a serious issue when a girl is as gentle as a lamb? It is just every now and again when she gets drunk, she and her boyfriend fight, and sometimes she slaps him. Well, of course, this question doesn't need to be asked when you're only interested in stopping violence against women. Violence against men is not a concern, and therefore those questions don't need to be asked. And so they're not. And that is now standard procedure for surveys of this type. And it is deliberate, because when you do ask the question the other way around, you get some inconvenient results. How do we know? Because it has been done before. I reported on this in my first half a dozen videos back when the original Stop Violence Against Women campaigns came out in 2016. So let's go over it again. In 2001, a report was published on young people's attitudes and experience of domestic violence. It's a 200-page report that surveyed approximately 5,000 teens and young adults between the ages of 12 and 20. On page 77, questions are asked to what extent young people accept or justify male to female and female to male domestic violence under different circumstances. The results: in every situation, those surveyed said that female violence towards males was more acceptable than vice versa. And so, for example, if she calls him useless, good for nothing, 13% think he is right to or has good reason to hit her, but if he calls her useless, good for nothing, 26% think she is right to or has good reason to hit him. And so it goes on down the line for every situation listed. At the bottom, 38% think that if she hits him, he is right to or has good reason to hit her back. But when it is reversed, fully 60% believe she is right or has good reason to hit him back. From the study: while the relative acceptability of hitting in these situations may be similar for males and females, the absolute levels reported are quite different, with female-to-male violence being considered more appropriate or justifiable than male-to-female for each situation measured. The difference is very small for situations where violence is deemed to be inappropriate, hence 5% think a man is right to or has good reason to hit his female partner if she argues with him or refuses to obey him, and 6% consider the same for a woman under comparable circumstances. For items where a greater proportion of the respondents think that the situation offers a right or good reason to hit, a much more substantial difference between the views of each gender was noted. A significantly larger proportion of respondents considered that a violent response by a woman either to be her right or to constitute a good reason to do so, for all but the first three items. This apparent disparity in what is deemed to be appropriate behaviour by gender is noted across all subgroup analysis. Males and females are more likely to say a woman is right to, or has good reason to, respond to a situation by hitting than a man in the same situation. So young males and females think it's more socially acceptable to hit boys. But hang on, males still hit females more, even if hitting males is deemed more acceptable. Or do they? Boys more likely to be victims of dating violence than girls. A recent study has found that Canadian teen boys are more likely to be victims of physical dating violence, a disparity that has been documented but rarely reported on by researchers in other English-speaking countries. Gee, I wonder why. The study, 10-Year Trends in Physical Dating Violence Victimisation Among Adolescent Boys and Girls, draws from a survey that was administered to nearly 30,000 students in 7th through 12th grade in Western Canada. Lead researcher Elizabeth Sawick, a professor at the University of British Columbia, told PJ Media on Sunday by phone that the difference in victimisation is small but statistically significant. For example, in 2003, boys were 2.6% more likely to report physical dating violence. In 2008, boys were 2.7% more likely to report dating violence. And in 2013, boys were 0.6% more likely to report physical violence from their partner. While it's a small difference because the overall percentages are fairly small, 2 or 3 percentage points might not seem significant, but when you look at that difference over thousands and thousands of high school kids, it's huge. Boys are 50% more likely to report physical dating violence, and that's a gap that has been more or less consistent for the last 2 decades. While it's a counterintuitive finding, Sowick urged readers to put themselves in the place of teens. Think about how generally unacceptable for boys and young men to actually haul off and slap a girl. But for girls, there isn't the same social sanction for hitting a guy, whether they're dating or not. Violence against men doesn't raise the same outrage. No kidding. That's why the current Australian government has spent $300 million on stopping violence against women.
The government has committed well in excess of $300 million towards women and children's safety. This includes $54 million in the most recent budget to services for women affected by violence and online safety initiatives.
So please share this video far and wide, because more people need to know just how warped the debate around domestic violence has become. And by all means, tell your sons that they should respect women, but that respect is a two-way street, and that you don't owe anyone respect that doesn't demonstrate through their own behaviour that they've earned it. I'll see you next time.